Thank you. Super Bowl of church. Wow, no pressure. That's cool. Super Bowl Sunday. Okay. How are you guys doing? Nice. I'm well too. Thanks for asking. Appreciate that. There's no one behind. Oh, there we go. Yeah, Easter. You know what's really has been interesting to me is whether you're in the church, whether you have a relationship with Jesus or not, Easter is one of these stories that you just know. I feel like everyone kind of knows it. It's become, or parts of it at least, and it's sort of like really familiar. And what's interesting is that familiarity can actually become, it can make you not appreciate the value in the story because it's so familiar. And that's how I felt. So that's how we're starting off. And so when I got requested to speak this Sunday, I left it unaccepted for like 7 days because I was like, I knew I was going to accept it, but I was like, maybe it'll change, and it didn't. So one of the things that Pastor Dave mentioned is when you're, reading through different stories, maybe imagine yourself as one of the characters or as some different characters and see who you relate with, and sort of just visualize that. And there's an actual term for it, and I just entirely forget it. But so I did that, and I walked through the story, and there's a lot of different thoughts that came up. And it's unfortunate how many people I related to, because it wasn't just Peter, and it wasn't just the other disciples. It was also like the Pharisees, but we're not going to talk about that today, because we have more thoughts in other spots, Scott. And it's also really interesting to compare what's mentioned in the different books of the gospel, because a lot of the stories are similar throughout, but some of them mention different things, and others and sometimes there's stories that every gospel mentions, and it's like there's got to be something really significant here outside of it all being significant. And so with that in mind, we're going to sort of go through the story a little bit abridged. But first, I'm going to pray. Jesus, I thank you for this opportunity to share what you've placed on my heart, God, and I pray right now that the quirks that are of me, they fall aside, God, but that the message that you're trying to share, the words you're trying to speak, God, that they hold true. Amen. So we're going to start sort of a week before Easter, the week before. And at this time, the disciples and Jesus are out and about performing all the miracles that Jesus did. And they were annoying the Pharisees more so than ever. And they're sort of at this point where the Pharisees had already decided, we're going to just get rid of this guy. But they were worried about the crowds. And so they said, we're going to just try and find a way to just entrap him, where he can like get himself stuck in what he says. And there's a lot of really incredible stories, and Jesus constantly evades. Constantly. He's like, nah, I'm not going to fall for that. And he just answers them in all the ways they didn't expect. And so the disciples witnessed all of this, and they were seeing this entire week and all this time go through. And then fast forward all the other moments, and we sort of end up at what they called, spoiler alert, the Last Supper. And so in this moment, they're breaking bread, they're having communion. Jesus tells them a lot of really incredible things. And then there's this whole moment where he says, one of you guys is going to betray me, and everyone's like, that can't be me, possibly can't be me. And then what was so bizarre is that they didn't even realize that Jesus said, I'm going to give this bread that I dipped to the person who's going to betray me, and they still didn't think it was him. And then Jesus says to Judas, go do what you have to do. And so now we're in this moment where it's just the disciples. And, the 11 disciples and Jesus. And he's sharing a lot of his heart, sort of the remainders. And particularly in John, there's a lot of what Jesus shares. There's this moment where Jesus says, hey, and it's in Luke 22:31. Simon, Simon. So before this, Jesus said, hey, all of you guys are going to desert me. And then Simon Peter was like, I'm not. They might, but I won't. And so we go in here, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat. But I've pleaded in prayer for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. So when you have repented and turned to me again, strengthen your brothers. Peter said, Lord, I'm ready to go to prison with you. and even to die with you. But Jesus said, Peter, let me tell you something. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me. Now, why did this matter? I was really intrigued. Like, why was Peter so obnoxious? Maybe he was the youngest. I relate with that. And maybe he just, he sort of made this bet in this moment. He's like, I'm not going to betray you. I know you're God. I know you're all powerful, but that doesn't matter. I know more. And what's really interesting is the reason this was so important, actually, if we go back in Matthew 16, we see when there's this other interaction that Peter had with Jesus and the other disciples. And this is where, so in Matthew 16, 13 to 20, when Jesus came to Philippi, he asked the disciples this question: what are the people saying about me, the Son of Man? Who do they believe I am? They answered, some are convinced you are John the Baptizer. Others say you are Elijah reincarnated, or Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And Jesus responded, but who do you say that I am? And this is the interesting moment. Simon Peter spoke up and said, you are the anointed one, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, you are favored and privileged, Simon, son of Jonah, for you didn't discover this on your own, but my Father in heaven has supernaturally revealed it to you. So this was a moment that one of the first humans outside of Jesus was aware to the revelation of the divinity of Jesus. And he was with all the other disciples. And then Jesus goes on and says, I give you the name Peter, a stone, and this rock will be the bedrock foundation on which I will build my church, my legislative assembly, and the power of death will not be able to overpower it. I will give you the keys of kingdom's heaven realm to forbid on earth that which is forbidden in heaven, and to release on earth that which is released in heaven. So in this moment, Jesus is like, I'm going to give you a whole new identity because of this revelation. And you're going to be the foundation upon which I build my entire legacy. So with this new identity came an incredible amount of responsibility. And that's why when Jesus said, you're going to desert me, he's like, no, they might, but I'm the guy that you're basing your church off of as well. Like, I will be the foundational part of it. Like, I would never desert you, because why else would you have given me this identity? So then they sort of spend, they're back at the supper, they're spending some more time, and Jesus sort of talks them through it. A lot of them were still like, can you show us the Father, though? Can you show us God? And he's like, how do you not? Like, I am. And so they ultimately leave this dinner sharing this revelation. And all of them are like, oh, you are God. We get it now. It took all the way up until then. So then they go to the garden. In John 16, 30 to 32. Now we understand that you know everything there is to know, and we don't need to question you further. And everything you've taught us convinces us that you have come directly from God. Jesus replied, now you finally believe in me, and the time has come where you will all be scattered, and each of you will go your own way, leaving me alone. Yet I'm never alone, for the Father is with me. There's a lot of moments sort of throughout that whole Last Supper that some of the Gospels, they go on about so many different pieces about what Jesus shared there. And some of them don't even mention so many parts of it. But the one thing everybody mentions is Judas leaving, very important. And it also mentions this interaction with Peter. So Jesus and his disciples, they march through town. They go to the garden. Jesus starts to pray, and he leaves some of the disciples behind, and he walks down, and he walks a little further, and he takes 3 of his disciples. One of them is Peter, and he says, stay here and pray, and I'm going to go a little bit further and also pray. And so while they do that, and Mark, it describes sort of what happens. Then he came back to his 3 disciples and found them all asleep. He awakened Peter and said to him, Simon, are you asleep? Do you lack the strength to stay awake with me for even just an hour? Keep alert and pray that you'll be spared from this time of testing. For the spirit is eager enough, but your humanity is feeble. What's really interesting to me about this moment is if you look at what Jesus also prayed, he also prayed from a very human moment. He said, I don't want to do this. God, I don't want to do this. if I don't have to do it, I don't want to do it. So in a moment of Jesus displaying some of his most intimate human moments, he was expressing sort of self-preservation in that moment. He's like, I don't want to die if I don't have to. And he comes back. You know, when Peter was talking to Jesus, and they had this, I'm not going to betray you. I won't leave you. I'll die with you. I don't know if you ever made a bet with someone, or you challenged someone, or someone challenged you. Like, I would do everything I can to follow through because I am the youngest. And I'm very, there's no one to disagree with me, so. But this is the moment, and then it sort of happens again. Jesus went away. He's like, guys, just pray. I'm going to keep praying. And comes back, same thing. They're asleep again. It was interesting. He's like, you can't even stay alert with me for just an hour. And then Judas comes, betrays him. We're going to sort of skip that piece. They bring him back to the palace where he's sort of being interrogated. And this is a really interesting moment because only 2 disciples followed Jesus. And, Jesus even said when he was being arrested, if I'm the one you want, let them go. And yet Peter and another disciple, that's what it said. I don't know who the other disciple was. Not as important as Peter being there, I guess. Peter and another disciple followed along behind them as they took Jesus into the courtyard of the palace. Since the other disciple was well known to the high priest, he entered in, but Peter was left standing outside the gate. Then the other disciple came back out to the servant girl who was guarding the gate and convinced her to allow Peter inside. As he passed inside, the young servant girl guarding the gate took a look at Peter and said to him, "Are you one of his disciples?" He denied it, saying, "No, I'm not." Now, because it was cold, the soldiers and guards made a charcoal fire, were standing around it to keep warm, so Peter huddled there with them. So, it was pretty gutsy for this guy to sneak into this palace where the person he'd been following for a long time now was being tried, and, well, I say tried loosely. He was being accused, let's say. And he sneaks in, and that's the first time, that's pretty ballsy. That's pretty, that expresses a lot more than I think I've ever heard that expressed, where this guy was willing, he said he was willing to die, and he's acting it out. He's following through, but here's the first moment where he said, "No, I'm not," because his self-preservation's like, But then to also sit around a fire with the people that are, accusing you after they just picked you up and saw you there, a lot of things must have been happening to just hang out there by this fire. What do you think they're talking about? Probably talking with the guy they just arrested. Must have been a really weird conversation for Peter to sit in at. Imagine how cold it was to feel obligated to sit there by them. And then in Luke, it says, after a while, someone else looked at him and said, "You must be one of them." "No, man, I'm not," Peter retorted. About an hour later, someone else insisted, "This must be one of them because he's a Galilean too." They must have been talking about everything. "Oh, where are you from? What are you doing here? Why are you here? Have you heard about this Jesus guy?" "Nah, not really." There's one thing about denying stuff, and there's also this option you have to just not respond or sit in the corner and wait for someone else to speak in. But Peter said, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. At that moment, this is what's incredible here is Luke is the only book that mentions this, but either Jesus is walking through the courtyard in that moment, or he has direct eyesight, because the next part is, at that moment, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Suddenly, the Lord's words flashed through Peter's mind: "Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you deny 3 times that you even know me." It's one thing to recognize your failure. It's another thing to look into the eyes of the person you made a promise to in the exact moment. But knowing the character of Jesus, those eyes weren't saying, "Told you so." In fact, if we look at what actually Jesus said to Simon when he said, "You're going to be tried," he said, "But I've pleaded in prayer for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. So when you have repented and turned to me again, strengthen your brothers. This wasn't a moment of failed faith. This was a moment of self-preservation that overtook Peter's faith. And what Jesus said there is he separated the moment of failure from the failing of faith. They can feel like they're in the same moment, but they're two separate moments. He says, I pray that your faith should not fail, so when you have repented and turned to me again. The prayer for his faith not failing wasn't that I pray that you don't do it, because he knew he was going to do it. But he didn't just, in this moment, he didn't just betray his friend. He didn't just, disappoint his God. He thought he broke the foundation of Jesus' legacy. Because Jesus gave him this identity, hey, you're the guy I'm going to build my church with. And he thought he broke it all in this moment. We can have moments of doubt and moments of failure without losing our faith. And the cross is just as much for those who know Jesus as it is for those who don't. And God has never requested your perfection. He's praying for your perseverance. We have this obsession in culture with streaks. I don't know if you have the Bible app or if you have any other app or Duolingo or something. They all have these how many days in a row. And I think it's actually the worst design that any humans have ever created was streaks. Because guess what? You're all going to fail. At some point, you're going to mess up the streak. So you're going to change your clock back just to lie to yourself that you didn't. Not saying I haven't done that. Or you adjust your rings because you don't have enough time to close them. And then that's another hack around it. So streaks suck. Thanks for those. But the value is really a momentum. The value is not, have I messed up one day? It's overall, where am I moving towards? Overall, what is the direction that my life is headed? It's if you're trying to work out every day, it's not that did I work out every day, but in the last 30 days, compared to the 30 before, what's the momentum that I'm creating in my life? There's another really interesting part to me that came up in these stories where when we look at sort of when Jesus was being crucified, we look at how different people all responded to this moment. We up until this moment, we don't really hear about the disciples again until the day after the resurrection. They sort of just disappear, and these are the people that walked with Jesus. These are the people that lived with Jesus, that broke bread with Jesus, that knew he was God. And these are the people that were not to be found at the crucifixion. They were not to be found on the third day at the tomb. But Jesus told them, it's gonna be me. I'll be there. And these are the people that should have known, of all people. But let's actually look at what we do see happen. As his body was taken away, the woman from Galilee followed and saw the tomb where his body was placed. Then they went home and prepared spices and ointments to anoint his body. But by the time they were finished, the Sabbath had begun, so they rested as they were required by the law. So these women did follow Jesus, and these women loved Jesus. These were some of his friends, and they were at the crucifixion. They're mentioned being there, witnessing it. And their action was, let me honor Jesus. Let me honor my friend. Let me honor this man. And so they were also convinced, not of, we don't need to put spices on his body because he'll be up in 3 days. They're like, let's make sure he rests in peace. Let's make sure he has a beautiful ceremony, as beautiful as the remainder of that ceremony can be. This is what the people closest to Jesus did. All of them. But let's look at what the Pharisees did. The next day, on the Sabbath, the leading priests and Pharisees went to see Pilate. They told him, "Sir, remember what the deceiver once said while he was still alive. After 3 days, I will rise from the dead." So we request that you seal the tomb until the third day. This will prevent his disciples from coming and stealing his body, and then telling everyone he was raised from the dead. If that happens, we'll be worse off than we were at first. Pilate replied, "Take the guards and secure it the best you can." So they sealed the tomb. and posted guards to protect it. The people that crucified Jesus were more worried about his resurrection than the people that followed Jesus. And it's not a way to justify moments of doubt, but it's a way to realize it's an expression of being human to have doubt. And the most incredible thing, and I'll wrap with this, is what Jesus did with Peter, because he said, so when you have repented and turned back to me. So he gives instructions there. He knew he was going to fail, praying for his faith. That moment of failure was not the loss of his faith. So in John 21:15, this is Jesus, rose. I'm sure we'll get into that next week. It's not my part of the story. Jesus appears to some of the disciples, and Peter went back to being a fisherman in that time of his grief. He's like, I'll go back. I don't have this new job. I'll go back to this other job. And after they had breakfast, Jesus said to Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you burn with love for me more than these? Peter answered, yes, Lord. You know that I have great affection for you. Then take care of my lambs. Jesus said, he repeated his question the second time. Simon, son of Jonah, do you burn with love for me? Peter answered, yes, my Lord. You know that I have great affection for you. Then take care of my sheep. Jesus asked him again, Peter, son of Jonah, do you have great affection for me? It's funny that Peter only remembers these things on the third time, because it says, Peter was saddened by being asked the third time and said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I burn with love for you. Jesus replied, then feed my sheep. Jesus took extra time with Peter to go over every single time he denied him. And so every time there's a moment where you feel like there's failure, or a moment you feel like you've lost faith, even if you haven't, but you feel that way, you feel like you're convinced, Jesus is there saying, do you love me? And he's just waiting for you to say yes. He's waiting for you to say yes. He's always going to create an opportunity for you to be redeemed. And the nice thing is we just have to say, yes, Jesus, I love you, and love him and repent. He does the hard stuff. But he's always going to create that opportunity. He's always going to create that moment. He's not looking for reasons to keep us out. He's looking for every reason to bring us in.